Hello. There we go. Hello, greetings. Welcome to class 8, where we will be talking about productivity. We'll talk about why it matters, what drives higher productivity, and how this relates to the supply curve and the orthodox approach to demand and supply equilibrium. So we've got a pretty lot of really important things to do. I'll try not to waste too much of your time by, why do I always have problems finding my lecture? Let's see if there we go, we got it now. Okay. And I do hope that you are all having a good day. Okay. Dogs, cats. I don't know how excited they really are. How's Corduroy doing? Oh, there he is, being his usual. It's like, how could he find economics so boring? I mean, I don't know. I think economics is really exciting. So, chickens. Yeah. Do any of you have chickens? Some of my friends have chickens. Goats. I'm not sure I know anybody who has goats, but we did have some goats come to our garden, my wife's garden, some years ago, about 8-9 years ago, to eat the poison ivy. We had a whole lot of poison ivy, so we had the goats come and eat the poison ivy. It was really fun having those goats around. The problem is they don't pull up the roots, so it was really wasted. Afterwards, we had to cover the roots. The poison ivy was coming right back, so we had to cover it all up with cardboard. And eventually the cardboard dissolves, and and we now have hostas and other plants over there. So that part worked, and the goats were cool, but it was a waste of money otherwise. Okay, why the neoclassical supply curve is wrong. Okay, should be getting this over to full throttle. Okay, and why demand and supply can't be separated. Here's basic stuff on what we should be doing. Okay, big ideas. We're richer because we're more productive. That's pretty straightforward. Higher productivity comes from membership in the community, through the division of labor, cooperative learning, and greater labor intensity. Capitalism promotes productivity by maintaining a clear link between productivity gains and profits. So capitalists, the people who benefit the capitalists, have an incentive and have the power to bring about greater productivity, either by reorganizing production or by getting people to work harder. And by discovering new and better technologies. And this has really been central. Capitalism has been the driving force pushing productivity, pushing for higher productivity, and the acceleration in human productivity since the mid-19th century, well, first since the mid-18th century, and then since the mid-19th century, has come about because of capitalism. It's not the only way. Slave economies, like the American South or the British West Indies, also experienced rapid productivity growth by historical standards. Like capitalism, a slave economy has the people who benefit, the capitalists or the slave owners, in a position to bring in new better productivity, technologies, better technologies, and to drive the workers to work harder. Now, in the long run, with no inputs fixed, marginal productivity is increasing, or constant, at the worst constant, which means the long run supply curve is flat or downward sloping. Nothing too exciting there. Okay. Rich and poor countries. face it, you're rich if you're born in the US or North America, Western Europe, Australia. I forget Saudi Arabia for the moment, because that's, hold on a second. Let me get the, okay, messed up here. Okay, I want to get the annotation back. Okay, there we go. Okay, now over here is Saudi Arabia. We don't care about that. Okay, why are we rich? We're rich because we're productive. Why are we productive? We're productive largely because we're born in the USA. I mean, there are some ways Americans are going to be more productive. We are generally healthier than people in, say, Brazil. Americans are still taller than people in much of the world, although that's no longer the case compared to Western Europeans, who are now taller than Americans, a sign of better health because of national health insurance and more egalitarian distribution of income. But Americans still have certain inherent advantages. But that notwithstanding, if you took an American worker and put that worker in Botswana, that worker would be not much more productive than other workers in Botswana, which is way less than workers in the United States. If you take a Botswana worker and you bring them to the United States, that worker will suddenly become enormously more productive because they're in the United States. Or if you take that worker and put them in Germany, Canada, France, where you are, your community matters much, much more than anything about the individual. You will be much richer because you were born in the United States or because you migrated to the United States than if you were born in India or China or stayed in India or China. And if you were born in India or China, you'd be much wealthier than if you were born in Botswana. Where you're born makes a much bigger difference than anything else about it. You could call it the genetic lottery. That's one aspect of the genetic lottery. Another aspect is who your parents are. Within the United States, that makes a huge difference in your life course, which we'll talk about another time. Okay. American workers produce more stuff in an hour than do workers in another country. But notice that gap has been, back in 1970, American workers were 50% more productive per hour than workers in France. Nowadays, there's very little difference between the US workers in the United States and France, and workers in Germany are more productive than workers in the United States. The gap has closed. The United Kingdom workers were more productive than workers in Germany back in 1970. That was still true in 1980, no longer true today. Germany has really accelerated its growth, notwithstanding that since 1991, Germany includes the former German Democratic Republic, aka East Germany, which was significantly less productive than West Germany. But that notwithstanding, Germany has become just about the most productive of the advanced capitalist economies. Norway isn't shown here. It goes back and forth, but I believe Norway, Norwegian workers, as of a couple of years ago, were the most productive in the world per hour. Okay. Overall, though, the difference among the rich countries pales compared to the gap between the rich countries and the rest. Africa is the poorest. East Asia and the Pacific, is Taiwan, South Korea, is more productive than India and Pakistan. East Asia includes China, the People's Republic, and that's about comparable to Latin America. But really, you get to the European Union and North America. Now, the European Union numbers pulled down by Italy and Greece and Poland, but it really, even that doesn't matter. You have a 2.5 to 1 gap between Latin America and the European Union, and a 20% gap between the European Union and North America. Between the European Union and South Asia, you have a 5 to 1 gap. So, there are a few really rich countries, and then there are the rest. The really rich countries are capitalist countries. If you Google me, you'll know that is not entirely my politics, but it's a recognition. Capitalism has been the driving force pushing up productivity and raising material standards of living. It's not the only way that this could be done. As I mentioned at the very beginning, slave economies also raised productivity. Communist systems of command and control, like Stalin, or to a little bit like what goes on in the People's Republic, they have also been able to raise productivity, though never as effectively as capitalist economies. Capitalism has been the way that the world basically the world's become rich. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to get it. Well, it's going to be shared fairly. I mean, the Orthodox view is that higher productivity will spread among everybody because there'll be increased demand for labor since workers are more productive. And that happened basically in the United States from 1790 to 1970. Real wages went up by about 1.5% a year. So that people were vastly richer in 1970 than they were in 1790, or 1900, or 1950 even. Between 1950 and 1970, real wages almost doubled. That's huge. Your grandparents compared to your great-grandparents. Your grandparents were much richer than your great-grandparents, who were themselves much richer than your great-great-grandparents. But since 1970, things leveled off. Not much increase in real wages. There are different ways to measure it, but overall, the labor share, the share of higher GDP that's been going to workers, has been fairly low. The increase in GDP has almost entirely gone to capital, to employers. When you take account that the real wage data include the wages of CEOs and top management, what's been happening to workers? Not much. They're becoming more productive, but they're not seeing it. In that way, they resemble slaves. I'm not equating the condition of workers in America with slaves, by no means, but they have that in common, that the workers, like the slaves, are working harder and more productively, but not seeing that gain. Workers are becoming more productive, they're just not seeing the higher wages. American businesses have figured out better ways to organize work, and the businesses themselves are keeping the profits. Why isn't competition for workers leading to higher wages? That is an issue that maybe you should bring up when you take macroeconomics. We're not going to talk about it very much here. Okay, little growth in productivity before capitalism. For most of human history, there's basically no increase in productivity. There's a little blip, for North America and Western Europe, UK, England, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Northern France. And then it spread. That was in the late 18th century. There's a little bit of an increase in productivity associated with what's called the Industrial Revolution. And then there was, it kind of spread. And after the Napoleonic Wars, it spread a little bit into Germany and Northern Italy. And then the big boom really started in the after the American Civil War and the wars of German and Italian unification, which you should know were all resolved by 1871. And from 1871 to 1914, capitalism really took off in Europe as well as North America, and businesses got bigger, productivity soared. For Europe, there was a little hiatus with the World War I and then World War II, while the United States productivity continued to grow, so that by 1948, 1950, the gap between US and the rest of the world was wider than it has ever been before or since. Since then, our productivity has continued to increase in the United States, and the rest of the world has been catching up. First, Western Europe caught up, and now Asia's catching up, although there's still a long ways to go. Now, why is capitalism associated with higher productivity? Capitalism combines authority with incentives. Capitalists control the means of production. They decide whether you're going to work or not. So right away, they can order you around. You don't like the job, leave. Starve. Competition between capitalists gives them an incentive. Capitalists run around all the time worried about somebody else getting a leg up on them and driving them out of business. I grew up in a capitalist family. My father ran milk business and later a coffee business. One of my brothers eventually took over the coffee business. Another brother became a real estate mogul. Around the dinner table, conversations about staying ahead of the competition, figuring out better ways to do things. And I can tell you, capitalist societies' status is not prescribed at birth. My father was Jewish, as was my mother, as am I. Through the 1970s, Jews could not go to all sorts of colleges, could not buy houses in all sorts of neighborhoods, but it didn't matter. We were still able to get rich. In a capitalist society, we could. Now, this does not necessarily characterize the position of all Americans from prescribed groups. Japanese Americans were thrown into concentration camps during World War II. Yet, like the Jews, they became very rich. Isn't that interesting? Discrimination, which was terrible against Asian Americans, greater than against Jews, certainly as much. And Asian Americans, Chinese Americans born in the United States are way richer than average Americans, average white Americans. African immigrants to the United States do quite well. Black African immigrants. Indian Americans are, after the Jews, the wealthiest group in America. I'm not sure where they stand compared to the Japanese, but they're right up there. The Jews are far and away the wealthiest ethnic group. But there are differences. Black Americans, African Americans have faced more discrimination than anybody else, more loss of property through riots, Tulsa, Wilmington, Greenwood, all those massacres, and of course, slavery. and legal discrimination in ways that nobody else faced. There was popular discrimination against the Irish, widespread discrimination against Jews, pretty extreme discrimination against Asians, but nothing compared to what African Americans faced. So when you get there, all the way to African Americans, capitalism didn't erode, has not effectively eroded discrimination. So African American status is still prescribed by the color of their skin and birth. But generally speaking, capitalists just judge you by your wealth. And if you can produce a good product, they'll buy it and you'll get rich. Generally speaking, that is the trend of capitalism. It can be overcome by social forces and discriminatory legislation, etc. But the trend of capitalism is to erode discrimination. Now, of course, capitalism produces its own discrimination. When the 1% use their power to lord it over everybody else. Okay, growth comes from other sources than greater labor intensity. All can be associated. Okay, cooperation, the division of labor. This is Adam Smith. I'm going to talk a lot about that. Cooperative learning and learning by doing. What goes on in the workplace, promoted by capitalism. And better public services also contribute to higher productivity. Okay, let's start with Adam Smith. The Wealth of Nations, which economists of all type are always citing, very few have read, and of those who've read it, very few have read the whole thing. Most of them read only the first 70 pages or so of a 1,000-page book, and almost nobody ever reads Adam Smith's other work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he regarded as his more important work. Okay, that said, he begins The Wealth of Nations with this line: the greatest improvement in the productive powers of labor and the greater part of the skill, dexterity, and judgment with which it is and anywhere directed or applied seem to have been the effects of the division of labor. Seem to have been? Oh, come on, Adam. Weasel words? You mean are the effects of the division of labor. What does this mean? What is the division of labor? The division of labor is where a task is broken down into component parts, and individual workers do each of those component parts. In a nail factory, he called it a pin factory. That's just the language at the time. 10 men can make 48,000 nails in the day, where one man could barely make one by himself. So one worker could maybe make one nail a day, going through all the different tasks. Instead, you have 18 distinct tasks divided up among 10 men. And those 10 make 48,000 nails. Isn't that amazing? This wasn't Adam Smith's original idea. It came from, French economist Quesnay. I believe it was Quesnay, François Quesnay. And Adam Smith learned about this. It actually is not a Scottish factory. Adam Smith was Scottish, although he taught in England. But he lived for a while in France. And I believe the pin factory that he's talking about is not in England, Scotland. I believe it's in France. And he learned about it while visiting Quesnay in France. Break up the job into component parts, give them to different people, although technically it could be one person doing it. One day I draw the wire out. One day I straighten the wire. Another day I cut the wire. Another day I sharpen the point. Another day I flatten the head. In 10 days, 2 weeks, I could make 48,000 nails. Notice he has 18 operations, but only 10 people. So clearly some people are doing 2 operations. Maybe they do one operation all morning and they do another operation in the afternoon. It doesn't have to be detailed division of labor with different people. But that said, breaking the task up allows for higher productivity. First, due to the increase in dexterity. You do one thing, you get better at it. You know this. Many of you played an instrument. You played the piano, the guitar, violin. Maybe you sang and you practiced. You played basketball and you practiced. You stood there. You on your parents' driveway with a basketball hoop and you threw layups. My God, even I did that for 1 year in 6th grade. I was never really good at any of this stuff, but I did get better. I would throw a ball against the wall and hit it with on the rebound with my bat, and I got better. You know, you practice and you get better. Dexterity increases with practice. Second, save time by just doing one thing instead of going from one thing to another. Happens all the time. How much time do I waste going from here to there to get something, or there to get a book, you know, whatever. Third, you develop machines or tools to get, you know, when you're breaking the task down, like you break this task down, you cut the wire. You realize that you need a better scissors, a clipper, straightening the wire. You realize you need a better way to pull it out, some tool that can help you pull out the wire. If you're just doing one thing, then another, then another, then another, if you're just going through these 18 tasks, you may not quite realize that. But when you break it down like this, you know, and you're spending all day doing this task, you start thinking about the better way to do it. You decompose productivity into two elements. Adam Smith's talking about the engineering element. How much output per day, per minute worked. But there's another piece here that Adam Smith never talks about, because he's not talking about capitalism. He's talking about engineering. Adam Smith never uses the word capitalism. When he talks about what we would call capital, it's kind of a whole separate thing. The other part is effort. How many minutes do you work per hour? Versus how many minutes do you spend playing video game while you're supposedly at work? Going to the water cooler and chit-chatting and gossiping with the cute people of the, you know, who are there. How much time do you spend hiding in the restroom from your boss? How much? Oh, I remember I had a friend in college. The summer after freshman year, he was from Queens. He had a job in LaGuardia Airport, loading food trays and putting them onto airplanes. And it was a graveyard shift, which he liked because he had no traffic getting to and from. But it got boring and the manager would disappear. So he and a friend would sneak into the cooler. They figured out how much they needed to do to avoid getting yelled at or fired, although eventually he was fired. But it was at the end of the summer and he didn't care. And yeah, they did kind of made sure they could meet their quota, so to speak, while keeping it low, on the low side of the quota. They didn't want to raise expectations. And they'd spend the rest of the time in the cooler, no joke, in the cooler smoking dope. Driving home, it was a good thing there was never any traffic because he was stoned out of his mind. Okay, productivity may increase because people work better. That's Adam Smith's thing. Or because they work harder. You know, how could you have gotten more work out of my friend? Stood over him and his colleagues, yelled at them, threatened to fire them until they stayed on the job, followed them into the cooler and confiscate their pot stuff and other drugs. What is that? Oh, okay. Okay. I mean, How many of you have this is me. I had one job in my life, basically, other than, bullshit working for my father or brother or teaching at the universities. For 1 year between college and graduate school, I worked on the research staff of a labor union. I realized after a while that this job wasn't for me, the 9 to 5 thing, and also they weren't giving me anything interesting to do. So I applied to graduate school. After I got into graduate school in April, I made my plans to travel in Europe with my friend, Hannah Hahn, and kind of checked out of the job. Showed up late, left early, spent a lot of time at lunch, and put my feet up on the desk with the idea that, what the hell, if they fire me, what difference does it make? I'd leave. I had enough money. Okay. Smith left out another reason: managerial power, day in the life of a manager. Now, why is it that they didn't have leverage over me or over my friend working at LaGuardia Airport? Because we didn't care if we lost the job. We didn't care if we were fired. I mean, at the beginning of the job, they had leverage over me. First of all, because I did care about my work. I believed in this union. And I'm overselling it a little bit. It wasn't that bad. But you have more leverage over your workers when they need the job, when they can't get another job. That's when you can really drive them. In a slave economy, of course, they have no alternative. You can whip them, you can kill them, they can't leave. Division of labor gives management power over workers because you can identify a particular task with a particular worker. When that task isn't being done, if there are 12 things that I'm supposed to be doing, it's harder to tell whether I'm doing my job. But if there's one thing I'm supposed to be doing, you can count those things up and see how well I'm doing. And of course, you can replace me more easily. Now, other motives than fear. A good company doesn't just rely on fear. You motivate people. Hey, come on, work harder and you'll win the World Series, maybe. I'll give you a cut of the World Series money. You don't want to betray your fellow workers. In fact, too much management can even get in the way because it makes it seem like you're doing this for the manager, whereas you're not doing it for the manager, you're doing it for your fellow workers, or because you believe in the activity, you believe in the Red Sox. Now, that said, there are important lessons from Smith. Well, he left out this whole management power thing. Larger scale of production, what we call economies to scale, is very important, and that's larger markets. This is something that's really been driven home by economists since. Now, keep in mind, there are different ways. Well, these are all different capitalist economies. There are different ways that capitalist economies go forward. The French model, the continental model, more welfare state activity, more directed investment by the state, human capital development with investment in education and research. I call this the French model, but it's also the Democratic program. I mean, this is Biden's Build Back Better. The other approach, liberate the capitalists. I call this the UK, Thatcher, Reagan, or generally the Republican model. They both are associated with about the same per capita income, but they're very different in the share of income going to the rich and going to workers. American workers have not had a raise. We've been following what I call the UK model here. The minimum wage hasn't been raised, as you probably heard, for 13 years. It's at the lowest level since the 1960s. American workers have been losing class struggle at work. Unions have been pretty much destroyed throughout the country. And the share of wealth going to the top 1% is at the highest level since the 1920s. Okay. Economies of scale get bigger. This is, Adam Smith focuses on this, the size of the market. Break that. This is why economists push free trade. Make the market bigger so that you can have a larger scale of production and more division of labor. And perhaps the most famous line in all of The Wealth of Nations is the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. If you have a chance, pick up Adam Smith. His writing is really good, even though I criticized something earlier. Okay. That said, rising productivity with scale contradicts diminishing marginal productivity, because what do we say here? The division of labor is limited by the extent of the market, larger markets, more division of labor, more productivity, bigger production, higher productivity. What's that say about marginal productivity? The idea of marginal productivity is you get bigger, you get less productive. But no, Smith is saying you get bigger, you get more productive. And empirically, this is true. Economies of scale, which we could include economies of agglomeration, which we'll get to. Productivity increases over time because of economies to scale, economies of agglomeration, learning by doing. Practice makes better. Again, Adam Smith's argument about dexterity. You do it, you get better. Produce more, you get better, you get more productive. Marginal productivity is not downward sloping in Adam Smith. Marginal productivity is upward sloping. Especially if you get economies of agglomeration. Why do we have the most expensive real estate in the United States? Why do so many businesses want to be down around Wall Street or the Midtown Business District? Kendall Square, Boston. Really, in Cambridge, sorry. Very expensive. Why do you want to be there? Why do you want to be in downtown Boston? I mean, all these high-tech, especially biotech businesses locate in the Boston area. It's very expensive. Why would so much of Hollywood be in Hollywood? I'm not talking about filming. They do that all over the world. But the lawyers, the planners, the writers' rooms, all that's in Hollywood. Why? It's so expensive to do business there. And then Buck's Restaurant. Maybe you know what Buck's Restaurant is? Buck's Restaurant is in Silicon Valley in San Jose. It's where so many of the tech people have hung out at the bar, eating dinner together, having lunch together, and talking about ideas. There was a time in the late 70s where you'd go there, you'd see Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and others sitting there talking about tech. Being there was where you learned the best stuff. Marginal costs rise only if marginal productivity falls. Supply curves slope up only if marginal productivity falls. That's what we've talked about. That's not the way it goes, though. Of course, even in the orthodox approach, it only works if you're adding one input. Who adds one input? You add more inputs, more ors. You had both legs, not one leg. Now what happens if you increase everything simultaneously? You're falling marginal costs, rising marginal productivity, more division of labor, economies of agglomeration, more opportunities for dexterity. Always. This was pointed out to me my junior year in college, and it blew my mind because, of course, it's true. At worst, you can always replicate the existing plant and maintain constant marginal cost. That's the worst thing that can happen. And in fact, you're almost certain to do better than that. So over time, and as you increase scale, marginal productivity rises, marginal costs fall, supply curves slope down. Add into this greater specialization, detailed division of labor, and you're going to get more learning by doing. People get better at what they're doing. This is what happened during World War II. It's phenomenal how much the US got better at what it was doing. Other countries, not so. The strain, the Soviet Union had to relocate much of its productive plant. They never quite caught up. Britain and Germany had a lot of stuff bombed that interfered. The Germans brought in a whole new workforce of slave labor from Poland, etc. And also semi-slaves from Western Europe, and of course all the Russian POWs who they worked to death. So productivity, these other countries are not quite the same. The US did bring in some workers, but the major workers that were brought in were Mexicans who were brought into the Southwest to work in the agricultural harvest under the Bracero program. And of course, Southern blacks and Southern whites also, who were brought north to work in the car factories and the plants in the Midwest. But those workers were brought in and they quickly got up to speed, and it was a stable workforce once they were there. So the US, we had huge increase in productivity. That's what lay behind these huge increases. I mean, look at how many guns, how many tanks we were making, and self-propelled guns. I mean, it's like, my God, we were so far ahead of everybody else. Yeah, the Soviet Union produced slightly more tanks than we did, but the tanks, with all due respect, were not that well made, and were not meant to be that well made. At some point, the Soviet Central Command, Stavka, figured out that the average tank was going to survive only like 72 hours on the front line. So why bother making them better? They're going to be destroyed anyway. Okay, productivity, learning by doing. Oh my God, it's like the first Liberty ship, merchant ship built on an assembly line. It took 230 days. Well, 42. They did build one in 4 days, but that was just to show off. Mostly because practice makes better. Willow Run produced thousands of B-24 bombers in the world's biggest building. Ford plant, and of course fell in just a couple of years. And this is the idea behind Keynesian economics. You may have heard of John Maynard Keynes. We'll talk about him occasionally. Not much. It's mostly a subject of macro. But the idea is that fast demand growth will lead to faster growth in supply, because productivity will increase as you're making more stuff. Marginal productivity curves will rise as you produce more. Marginal costs will fall. The supply curve, the long-run supply curve, even the medium-run supply curve, will be downward sloping. Produce more, you'll have lower prices. You want to lower the cost of production? Let loose productivity. Let loose demand. Increase demand and productivity will go up. Busy workers are more productive. I mean, look at that bored guy at Best Buy. Although, technically, maybe he's doing something useful. Maybe he's studying. What is it we're trying to sell today? Look at that busy young woman at the cash register, where an ID is required for checks. I got the people pay by check. A few years ago, I was standing behind somebody at a supermarket who was paying by check. I was like, get the fuck out of here, lady. You're wasting a lot of time writing out this check. Haven't you ever heard of a credit card or Venmo or cash even? Cash. Anybody have cash? Anyway, anyway, she's very busy, and she's being very productive. If she wasn't busy, she'd be standing around. Her productivity is higher because she's busy. And so increased demand, falling marginal costs. The long run supply curve is downward sloping. If long run costs fall and the supply curve is flat and downward sloping, then prices will fall with rising demand. Oh my God. What does this all do to the orthodox model where demand and supply intersect at some equilibrium? If the supply curve is not upward sloping, but is downward sloping, and after all, the demand curve may be upward sloping too. If costs fall with higher output, what sets prices? You're in a world of some sort of administered prices where businesses set prices to cover their costs, provide the profit that they're expecting, and maybe when, as we've seen in the United States in 2022, when they can get away with it, they go, oh, maybe we can widen that profit margin some more. Yeah. Or we could have government regulation, which, by the way, often happens with government stepping in and complaining about, for example, the US and the Europeans are working on an arrangement to set a maximum price for Russian oil. Screw the Russians. Why should they make all the money? Okay. Takeaway points: marginal productivity does not fall, marginal costs do not rise. Supply curves are flat or downward sloping. Therefore, there's no equilibrium of downward sloping demand and rising supply. Instead, prices are set by some administered process. Whew. Okay, this was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. And we will pick up next time and talk about whatever it is we're going to talk about next time. I don't remember, but we'll get to it. Have a good day. Let's see, where's my dog? Oh, he hasn't moved. Oh my God, he spent this whole time lying there like that. Lazy dog. Why doesn't he get up and give a lecture? Work hard, that dog. He knows I'm not going to fire him. Bye-bye.